should have been second generation.
Sure.
We're the king's kids, something like that.
There you go.
Our dads were in travel.
Good morning, everybody. Everybody, what is it, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed? We are glad you're here as we have just the opportunity to thank God this weekend for His faithfulness in 120 years of the church. And I'm old, but I'm not that old, I'll just tell you that. But we are glad you're here. We had a great service last night, and we're just looking forward to today. And we have some special guests who are joining us, ministry partners that we have had the opportunity to partner with for years. I guess I kind of knew last night that it was a significant amount of years, but I was surprised just how significant it was. And that's a testament to people long before me who have seen the value of missions in this church, and so we're thankful for that. We have Steve and Marilee Torgerson and Darwin and Darlis Anderson who are going to share, and I'm just going to turn it over to them. I think you guys have probably worked something out, I hope. I don't know who's coming first. Maybe both. The boys are first. All right, so come on up.
I'm Steve Torgerson, and my connection to this church is Marilee Lindquist Torgerson. So this is Red and Naomi's daughter, if you remember the Lindquists. And Grandpa Jesse Vedum. So our plan this morning...
5 minutes.
Yeah, okay. So Darwin and I are going to share some stories.
4.5.
And so time is counting, he's telling me. And then we're just going to open it up for questions, I think is the plan. So I'm going to need your help on this story. I'm going to tell this. So I was in China, and I was taking a handful of pastors around, a little tour group. And we were in a particular city where there is a government Bible school, seminary, probably Bible school is the best word for it. And as we were looking around, in the gate came 3 people, 2 women and a man. I looked at their clothing, their hair, their skin. I thought, these are country folks for sure. I bet they are not from government churches. I bet they're from what we call a house church. Sometimes people call it an underground church. That's really not the right word. That sounds political. They're house churches, and the Chinese word is jiating, jiahui, which is a house church. And so my office manager, Kat, was with me, and I said, hey, Kat, go over and talk to those people and see if they are house church people, and if they are, will they hang around until we get done with our tour, because I'd like to talk to them. So sure enough, they were. They hung around. We come and talk to them, and so I asked them, one of the tallest lady was kind of the spokesperson. And I said, so do you people know Jesus? She said, oh yeah, we know Jesus. And so do you have a story about how you came to know Jesus? She said, oh yes, we do. And then she stopped and she turned to her friend and she said, oh, you tell him your story. Your story is just wonderful. And so this lady started talking. She had a really, really heavy accent. I couldn't figure out anything that she was saying, but the cat was on it. And it turned out that some years ago, she started getting arthritis in her hands and fingers. And so she went to the doctor. He gave her some medication, got a little bit of relief. The arthritis continued to deteriorate or get worse. She went back, got a little stronger medication, got some relief. This went on for several years. But the arthritis kept getting worse and worse and very painful. And finally the doctor said to her, I don't have anything else I can give you. There's nothing that will help you. You're just going to have to live with it. And so it continued to get worse to the point where she could no longer use her hands and help with the family. So now she's a liability, which meant she couldn't help with any cleaning. She couldn't help with any cooking. Her daughter had a child. She couldn't help with child care, and they had to help her. And it was very shameful, very embarrassing, but at the same time it was just painful. And so she was just in misery and hopeless and had no alternative for help or hope. And her friend finally said, why don't you go talk to the Christians? I heard their God maybe can do something for you. So this was an interesting rumor that was spreading around, and so they knew about something about this. And so that her friend knew of a Christian woman, and so she went over to, first the lady refused to do that. That was just nonsense. And then she finally said out of desperation, okay, I'll see. And so she goes over to this woman's house and comes in, and she asks if her God could help her. And the Christian lady says, well, yes, he can. And so she said, will he heal me? Will he make me better? And she said, well, I don't know. And the conversation went on. And so, she wasn't making a promise that would seem inappropriate. And so the woman who had the arthritis just got fed up with it. And just because she thought this woman would do some kind of little incantation. Maybe she'd sprinkle some moon dust on her hands and say vuba vuba ping or something, and it would all get better. She was expecting something like that, and nothing like that happened. And so she said, I'll just forget it, I'm leaving. And then the Christian woman said, but just a minute, here's what I can do. I'll get all my Christian friends together and we'll fast and pray for you and ask if God will heal you. You just go home. So the woman goes home, finishes out another miserable day, gets up the next morning, nothing changed. Lives through another horrible day of pain, frustration, disappointment, shame. Goes to bed, gets up the next day, same thing. The third morning, she woke up. So here's Darwin, is what I want you to come over here. So you're me, and I'm this lady. And she says, and the third day I woke up and look at what I can do with my fingers. And she's just shaking them right in my face, and she was just in shock that day, and she just bolts over to that other woman's house, knocks on her door, and said, "Look at me, who did this?" And so then she tells her about Jesus and who Jesus is. And so as we're standing in the courtyard in that Bible school, she said, "And today, all my family loves Jesus. We worship Jesus in my house, and he is our Lord." God still does things like that, and he's not finished. He just interferes in dramatic ways. Well, Marilee's comment is, just think about that. Is this the Christian woman made no promise, and then what did the church do? They'd never seen or met this woman, so for 3 days they all fasted and prayed. Just an idea for the Thief River Falls Free Church to maybe think about doing some things like that for your community. But okay, your turn.
Yeah, we went to to Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, and the refugees that are trying to get to Greece, a lot of times their rafts go down around Cyprus, and so they end up getting hauled onto Cyprus Island and put into a little refugee camp there. And they're bummed out. They call it the rat trap because they never get out of it, and it's a real bummer deal. But Dar and I went in to do an English camp with these refugees, and there was a little guy running around the camp named Messi. He was 2 years old, and well, I mean, that's an appropriate name for most 2-year-olds. And so, little guy, black hair, black eyes, found out he's from Iran. And Dar had his mom in her English class. And first day, the lady brings a piece of paper with her, hands it to Darlis, and on it is the story of her life. And she was in Afghanistan, a wife there, and had three teenagers. And one night, Taliban attacked their village, and they killed 1,000 people. And she took her 3 kids and ran, and made it out of the country, made it over to Iran from Afghanistan, which is quite a hike. And they speak the same language there, so that worked. Lived on the street in Iran with her 3 kids. And a businessman that was involved, a Muslim businessman, was involved feeding the poor there. And he took care of her and her kids along with another crowd of people out on the streets there. Well, anyway, this guy was a pagan Muslim guy, and so fell in love with this Muslim woman and asked her if she would become his wife. And when she said yes, his wife's parents came after him to kill him, which is normal. And so he ran with her and her 3 kids to Cyprus and to this refugee camp, even though he was a fairly wealthy businessman. She was pregnant by that time, and so they ended up in this refugee camp. Comes time for the baby to be born, goes to an Greek Orthodox hospital in Cyprus. They'd never been around anything like that before in Iran. And so she's laying on the table, they start delivering her little boy, and he's dead. And they can't revive him, his cord was wrapped around his neck, and so he's dead. And so they do all that they can do, can't revive him, work on him, he's blue. And so they wrap him in a blanket, put him over on a little bench along the side of the delivery room. And she's laying there, and they're stitching her up, and she's mourning the loss of this little guy. And she sees a picture of Jesus on the wall, which she'd never seen before, but she knew who he was because of the crown on his head. And so she said to Jesus, if you will raise my son from the dead, I will follow you, and I will tell my kids about you. And about 3 minutes later, that little bunch of cloth started kicking over there and crying, and he raised her son from the dead. And so Messi was short for Messiah, and so his name wasn't about his hygiene habits. It was it was short. So anyway, so she and her husband and the teens knew Christ and were living in a tin box on Cyprus Island, trying to figure out what to do with their lives. So, yeah.
God works in powerful ways still. And if you need some reminders, pick up your book of Acts, read it again. Still the same God, still doing the same things. One more little story. This is a real short one. The 2 of us were talking about, we've just got so many stories like this to tell you. That's one of the beauties and privileges of cross-cultural life and living. You just run into God in wild, surprising ways. It's not always miraculous and heroic and wonderful, but then there are those moments. So that we're sharing these stories with you to encourage you is God is real. He's very much alive and very powerful. Still does these fantastic things. Don't forget that. Don't think it just happened a long time ago and it's just a New Testament story that was probably exaggerated. Those are not embellished. They're bare bones, real things. One more little story. So what we do in China is training and teaching. And shouldn't have said that word, but I did. This is all recorded. Okay. And so in our teaching and training, sometimes we don't advertise that, and we keep it real quiet. And we work with people who aren't supposed to be there, but they're all some kind of church leaders. So we were getting ready for a training event, And sometimes people travel really long distances to come to these kinds of things. Sometimes in the older days, it was for days. And on this particular occasion, one of the pastors, when I say pastor, probably that's misleading. Let's call him a church leader. Maybe a lay evangelist would be a more equivalent category. He was riding his bike. And so he had a bridge to cross. There was a big bridge across a river. So he wasn't that far away from the training event. And he gets on this bridge, and it's got a lot of wood slats. And so there's steel underneath, but then the cross beams are all wood. He's on his bike, and as he's going across the bridge, this big truck comes rumbling across the bridge, and just everything just starts shaking and shaking and shaking and becomes really violently shaking from this big heavy truck. And as the truck is coming by him, so the truck's coming toward him, he's riding his bike, and he loses his balance on his bike, falls over and falls under the truck. And so he's behind the cab, the tractor part of the truck, and falls before the rear wheels are coming, and he's laying there, and these rear wheels are coming right at his face and chest, and death is just a half a second away, and all of a sudden the rear wheels lift up, float over him, drop down on the other side, and he's just laying there just shaking, but saved. And he gets back up and walks his bike across the bridge, gets to our training event, and declares, the Lord is with us here. And he's protected me to make sure that I'm arriving. He's going to be with us during these 3 days of training. Things like that happen too. I'm finished with my stories, unfortunately.
We have a young man in Egypt. He's Egyptian, and his name is Rami. And Rami's got a great big brain, And his grades were so high in high school, even as a Christian kid, he was Orthodox, he got a scholarship, which is really rare for Christians, but they couldn't really do anything about that, so they had to give him a scholarship. And they sent him to the best. I mean, in Egypt, if your son or daughter, your highest dream for them is to be an engineer. That's number one. And then secondly, to be a doctor. Well, they sent him to engineering school with this huge brain of his. And he's from a ghetto in Egypt, poor area, Telleton Street. And so they had a big bash for him. The clan, family members, neighbors came and sent Rami away to college with a big bash because he was the first child ever to go to engineering school out of the ghetto. Got there, first week of school, gets called in by the dean and says, sorry, Rami, you got to go home. Muslim kid came and took your spot. And so he's got to go back to Alexandria. And embarrassed, all the frou-frou about him going, and got to go home. So he goes home, finds a little hashish bar, starts doing hashish, and ends up addicted to hashish, hears the gospel, and comes to know Jesus, still doing a little hashish on the edge, come to our training center, still doing a little hashish on the edge. So I go in, we sit down at a coffee shop while I was there teaching, and he says, Dara, I'm addicted to hashish. And I said, so how's your walk with Jesus? And he says, oh, it's pretty good. I said, well, that's fine. He'll take care of that in due time. It's all right. And he was rather shocked by that, being from the Egyptian church and stuff. And so it started a relationship of honesty between us. And he started sharing with me regularly, I'm praying, God, that I'll go deeper. I just got to go deeper. I want to go to North Sudan. My uncle was killed there, martyred there as an Orthodox missionary. And I want to go back to North Sudan, and that's where I want to be a missionary. And so he said, but I got to go deeper because North Sudan's real tough. And so I've been asking God, I got to go deeper. So it comes 2-3 months, he's praying, God, I got to go deeper. How do I go deeper? In November, I get up at 6 in the morning, I'm doing my coffee and stuff, and I see he's awake. at 6 in the morning. Well, in Egypt, the pigeons aren't even awake at 6 in the morning. There's nobody awake at 6 in the morning. And so I get on WhatsApp and I say, Rami, what in the world are you doing awake? And he said, well, last night God answered my prayer. And he told me what I got to do. He told me to count how many people I haven't forgiven in my life. And he told me I have to forgive those people. And so I've been arguing with him all night. And I'm still awake. Because there's 17 of them that I haven't forgiven. And he told me I got to go do that. So anyway, he lined them up in order of worst to best. I mean, the ones that are going to be the hardest, the ones that are going to be the easiest, and determined to go find them. The first one was a theology teacher at the seminary that sexually abused his sister. And he had to go find him and confront him and forgive him. God told him he had to forgive him and tell him that he loved him. So went and found that family up in Cairo. He used to be the best friend of that guy's son. So then their son was second. And then he had to go find two guys in Alexandria that were both, he had the right to kill them in Egypt. So they weren't real thrilled about meeting with him. They had played around with his girlfriends that he was dating, and in Egypt that is an offense that you can take a guy's life for. So they wouldn't meet with him. They were Orthodox guys. They wouldn't meet with him. So he had to go do the detective thing and find out where they were, trailed them into the Orthodox church on youth night, waited until 1 in the morning. One of them came out, followed him through the streets, followed him back to his apartment and cornered him before the elevator could come down in a corner of the foyer of his building, and said, I need to forgive you for what you've done, and God has told me I need to tell you I love you. And this guy said, could we ever start meeting and so you could tell me about this relationship you have with God? I'm just desperate. And the second guy, same way. Second fellow that he could have killed, same way. And so Rami had a evangelistic and discipleship relationship with these two men. Finally got through the whole list and managed to humble himself and get that all right with all those people. Yeah, so. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And he got all his dictionaries.
Yes. Yeah.
We'd like to open it up in the time that remains and have our wives join us. And it's just open attack or whatever you want to say or do. We're ready for it. Questions? Maybe I'll run around with a mic, and then whoever the question's directed to can answer. Does that sound okay? Any questions?
Mr. Gallagher.
Just tell me a little bit more about where Rami's serving and what he's doing right now, about his life.
Yeah, Rami decided to leave Egypt. He broke up with a beautiful young lady there that was on our staff team, and so he felt called to Turkey. You'd be amazed how many people feel called to different places by unique circumstances. And so Rami felt called to Turkey after he broke up with this beautiful young lady, and so he's working in Istanbul, trying to learn Turkish and chasing after a Russian Orthodox guy that's converting to Islam. And that's his best friend, a guy in his Turkish class. And then one day a week goes out in the parks and asks God, okay, who do I share with? And it's a pretty dangerous thing. So, and anyway. Yeah.
You need to tell them the rest about Sama.
Okay, yeah, so, all right. So because Esther's a woman, she wants you to hear the rest of this. So this Sama is dandy, and Rami walked away from her because he's afraid of getting married. And so he comes back to Egypt. His dad is going to die. Comes back to Egypt to visit and to spend some time with his dad before he died. And God has just convicted him about what a pig he was, and in walking away from this woman and breaking her heart and not helping her go through this whole, breakup of their engagement with her family, and just how he abandoned her. So asked her out for coffee and says, okay. Well, first of all, he said, would you meet me for coffee? And she said, I'll get back to you. 3 days later, she made him suffer. And all the women are going, yeah, good. Yeah. And that's why Esther wanted me to share the story. And then meets with this gal who's deep woman, and says, I was a pig, and all this my fault, not yours. And so if you would, I'd like another shot at this engagement and marrying you. And she said, I'll get back to you. And so, a month and a half later, 2 months later, he starts calling her, and they finally going to tie the knot sometime late summer. So we hope to get to Egypt.
No, she's in Egypt.
She's in Egypt, yeah. So they're doing the long distance thing, yeah.
All right. Is this on? Yeah. Any more questions?
Did any of you gals ever feel threatened in your situations?
We've been a lot in Eastern Europe, and that was basically felt pretty safe. But we did go into Egypt during the Muslim Brotherhood time in 2012. We had staff there that asked us to come, and our first response was, it's really dangerous there right now, but how could we say that when they live there and serve there? So we did, and we were coached quite a bit before we left as to how to keep a low profile, like we don't stick out in an Egyptian country, but we kept quiet, just head down, no loud speaking your voice.
Cold in the church.
Yeah, so
no,
but we just quickly got into our car. We just kept a low profile the whole time. They put us up in a Presbyterian home for visitors, so we were. But in Egypt, there's no heat. There's no air conditioning usually, but there's no heat. And so whatever temperature it is outside, it is inside. And this was February. And so it was about 50 degrees outside, but it was also inside. So imagine never being in anything over 50 degrees. And that means in your bathroom, in the shower, in everywhere we were, we froze. We just froze. So the danger kind of was a little overpowered by the fact we were freezing to death all the time.
Sometimes God gives you other things to be concerned about.
We had hot water, so at the end of the day we would thaw out our toes at the side of the bathtub and then run really fast to bed. But in that culture at that time, we were supposed to stay very quiet and just go about our work. Our staff shopped for us and kind of kept us just kind of undercover. We drove across town to get to the places where we were doing ministry, and our driver, our staff guy, said, now this is a Muslim country, and just so you know, if there is an accident and if blood is drawn, if we're in it and there's an accident, you will be killed. So just so you know that. Just good to know. Sure. So, yeah.
So Dara's working on her Bible study.
Yeah. That cured me from ever being a backseat driver again.
I was not in countries where we were in danger, but I got a lot of my purses stolen. I don't think that counts, though. Can you think of any examples where I felt actually more safe there than I do here sometimes? As far as big cities go, Asian cities are quite safe, except for things like getting your purse stolen. Yeah.
I was in danger lots of times, though.
Yeah. So, but
often.
he doesn't count, right?
So travel into a site, middle of the night, sneak into the facility room, house. Always stay away from windows. If you have to go to the toilet, sometimes you'd have to wait until it was dark. Toilets are outside at certain places. Riding in a vehicle, anytime you get stopped by the police, you can't hide your color of your eyes, your nose. Once we were in a van, we got picked up in an airport way up north, way north of, getting close to what would be the southern Alaska border. China goes way north. And we're going to cross a river, and the police pulled us over to the side and wanted to inspect the vehicle. So it was winter, it was very cold, so it was me and another white guy, and 4 Chinese, I think it was. And we were heading up to a training event, and we had stocking caps on, scarves, so we could pull those over our noses. Those are just, nose is a bad thing. Just got to get that out of the way. And it was dark, so he couldn't see the color of our eyes. And so he didn't suspect that there were foreigners in the van, it would have been deadly if he had realized there were 2 of us, or even 1. We were praying like crazy that this policeman would not look at our faces. And because then it wouldn't be that we would be in trouble, the people we were with would all be arrested. And so what are you doing with these foreigners? And so then kept our heads down, which is proper Chinese. With authority people around, you don't look them in the eyes. You just keep your head down and keep quiet. So this policeman steps into the side door of the van and walks. He's standing right behind my seat, and the other Steve, both of us were named Steve, was in the front. And so then he starts looking at all the things in the van, and there was a box with a bunch of Christian materials, not our stuff, but from that church. And that was all contraband. Cassette tape stuff, booklets of Christian things. Police says, "What are these things?" And so Peter, who was our host, Pan is his surname, Peter Pan. Peter said, those are Christian materials, those are our things. Police opens the box up, looks inside, and rifles through him, steps out of the van. Peter follows him, have a conversation. We don't know what's going on. Peter comes back into the van, shuts the door, says, "Let's go." Okay, so what was all that about? He said, well, they were searching for pornographic material, and we didn't have any. And they looked in our box, none of it was pornography, and so then they let us go. And that was it. But all the time, all of our training events were covert, and if there was a white guy there, that was always a big liability, which was why we were in a hurry to turn over all of our training activities to locals, and then it went much smoother. I was arrested once, and nothing bad happened to me, but psychologically it's very terrifying. Take your passport, let me go back to my hotel. You come into the police station in the morning. I was with Steve again, and then we expected an interrogation. Steve's Mandarin is just fabulous, and so they spoke to him first. Meanwhile, I'm set aside in this little room by myself, and the night before we rehearsed our story. Who are we? How do we know each other? Why are we there? How do we know these people that we're with? And so we practiced what we would say, because if it's not exact, if you're not both telling the exact same thing, then what are you hiding? How come your stories are different? And so I never got that training at seminary about how to do that kind of stuff. So that was just common. So we prayed a lot, fasted many times before we went on trips. never knew what you were going to bump into. And God oversaw us over and over and over again. I remember one time one of our guys were saying, we know a lot of other ministries that have all kinds of trouble with police and difficulties, and for some reason we don't. We have much less than others, and so we just felt like God's protection.
Yeah. Just a real quick story. We have a new staff guy from Uzbekistan, pastor there, and he's at Trinity now at TED's, getting the last part of his degree before they go back to Central Asia. But first time I met him and his wife came to a staff conference to talk to us about coming on staff for a while. If we would cover them till they could get their support raised, they'd run out of Uzbekistan. He was arrested the second time, and they just told him, if we ever arrest you again, we will rape your wife and we will sell your children. And so that night they packed their stuff up and took off, got across the border, miraculously got to Russia. That didn't work. Russians are fairly racist, and they had dark skin, so they ended up in Lithuania. The Lithuanian church they settled down beside took everything they had, ripped them off, and stole everything they had pretty well in the first couple of months. So he's laughing, telling me about this, chuckling. And I'm thinking, that's kind of a funny way to talk about people that have ripped you off in the church. And so he said, evidently the Lithuanian police don't help the Uzbek or the Lithuanian church with discipleship like they do in Uzbekistan. I said, what? He said, well, yeah, in Uzbekistan, when you get baptized as a new believer, you get an automatic invitation to the police station, and you don't have a choice. You got to come. It comes across your computer screen, and down you go to the police station, and they put you in a room, and then two men come in with batons, and they beat you for about 20 minutes to try to get you to renounce Christ. And if you can stand that, they've done a tremendous work in helping the church with discipleship. And so it's just a little different look at discipleship. Yeah. So
we had finished a training event. Sorry, we're going on with more and more stories here. It was the other Steve again with Max. Max is one of our key trainers, and Max is a local guy. He wasn't too pleased with the maturity of the trainees. They were younger guys, and he felt like they just weren't living up to standards. They hadn't suffered enough, was the problem. And so as they were leaving, Max was just worried about that. He said, these guys really don't know what it means to suffer and the value of suffering. Max himself has been arrested 10 times, beaten 7 of those times. He kind of gets it. Knows what suffering's about a little bit, all kinds of things stolen by the police, and but he said, you really don't know how much juice is in the grape until it's squeezed, and so they'll find out. Those young guys are going to find out how much juice is in the grape. Squeezing is good. Just a thought, Pastor Kevin, in terms of your future plans on discipleship. Squeezing is a good thing. Any other questions? Esther? Now there's going to be a quota. This is number 2.
That's fine. Just wanted Darwin and Darlis to talk a little bit about a young man that has captured our heart and has got a really cool story. And right now he's in need of $6,000 for a vehicle that I would really like to see our church rally around if we could. But go ahead.
When ISIS was taking over northern Syria, Al-Adin was a 24-year-old law student, and he knew that his Islam faith was too moderate and that he was in trouble. So he took off running to try to get away ahead of ISIS coming through their region and conquering that area. So, but he got caught, and they stripped down electrical wire. stripped the plastic back, and so just the copper ends, and just made his back look like a train track. Ripped his flesh, and they injected him with something that made the enamel fall off of his teeth, and so they were just spikes. Put him in jail, and then the Assad's government started bombing the prison he was in, and he said, "You have never faced fear, Dar, until you're in a prison, in a cell with 20 guys, standing room only, and the ceiling starts coming down from being bombed." He said, it kind of maxes out fear. And so then they took him out, and they would give him rotation days as a minesweeper. And so they'd go to areas they felt were mined and let him out of the truck, and then he'd have to walk this path of area they wanted to make sure wasn't mined. And they used him as that. And one day in that process, he got over a little knoll and took off and made it eventually up into Lebanon. Didn't have papers, didn't have anything, so ended up living on the street. But found Jesus in Lebanon. And he had a dream, as a lot of Muslims do, and then went seeking out this fella, whoever that is, in the white robe, and started a relationship with Christ, but PTSD like you can't believe. So the first time I went in to train there, I raised my voice a little bit because some of the church guys in the group were tailing off on me. And boy, Aladdin just about climbed the opposite wall. So living on the street, living on park benches, he would stay in a cafe until 12 every night, and then the cafe would close, and then he ran the streets from 12 until 7 in the morning when the buses came. So 7 days a week, 12 till 7. He ran to stay ahead of Hezbollah, stay ahead of Hamas, stay ahead of the drug dealers. And about 3, well, you guys know, about 3 o'clock, Satan would come to him and just start, "What in the world have you given up? Your family, you have nothing. Why in the world would you give up everything for this silly belief you have?" And his chest would start to tighten, and he couldn't breathe. And we happened to be in for a camp at this time, and so he stopped by, and we spent some time together. And I said, "You got a Bible?" No, I can't carry a Bible with me when I'm running. I said, "You got access to a Bible?" "Yeah, when I go to church on Fridays, there's a Bible there." And I said, "Okay, here's some passages." And we started to open up the scriptures and took him in to Psalms and took him into Isaiah, gave him about 20 scriptures. And I said, you write these out on a piece of paper, and each night you go out on the street, you take a piece of paper with you, you stick it in your pocket, and when Satan starts to breathe those lies into your ears, you pull out the scripture and you fight him with God's word. And that worked. Just gave him just one little tool to help him. And now he's working. He's got a kindergarten in his apartment for elementary school kids. About 13 little squirts come that are Syrian refugee kids. There are 3 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Lebanon is a 17th the size of the state of Nebraska. And it's on a mountainside, just like this. And there are 3 million Syrian refugees there. And the Syrians invaded Lebanon and killed a whole bunch of people, slaughtered them back in 2004. So you can imagine the attitude about the Syrians being there. And so Aladdin sneaks around because he's got those gifts from being homeless. Now that he's got an apartment, goes out, stays away from the police, visits Muslim homes, families, shares about Jesus, prays with the husband and wife and the kids, invites the kids in, and he just got a great... He needs a vehicle because there's riots. The price of bread a year ago that was $1 is $85 now in Beirut for a loaf of bread. So it's just bizarrely nuts. And so parents won't let their kids come to kindergarten unless he hires a taxi to bring them. because there's so many riots and so much going on. Nobody will let their kids out of their house, and so or out of their apartment. So he's looking for a car. Yeah. So yeah. I think it's time.
Good one, Esther. Any more questions? I'll have to pass this down.
Just wondering now, with the Asians taking over salt, how is that handled, and with the situation in Hong Kong now?
So our departure from Hong Kong was a physical signal statement that the leadership of the SALT ministry, which is what I'm one of the co-founders of, is now handed over to our Chinese staff. And that went very, very well. They know what they're doing. They've been in leadership for many years. They're extremely devoted. The SALT team, it's the office, the Hong Kong side of the SALT team has shrunk. We don't do as much publishing now as we used to do because that's turned over to our people inside the country. And everything's online. And well, things are online, but I mean they are doing the writing and they are doing the editing and the formatting, so that we've taught them how to create new courses and how to publish them, basically, is what it amounts to. It was a very long, tedious, about a 10-year process, and we're just about finished with that. So there are 4 guys in Hong Kong, KK, Music, and Ningo, that run the organization. They've been part of our team. Music and Ningo maybe 12, 15 years, something like that. And then KK maybe 8. KK is used to head up one of the main TV news departments. So he had 300 staff working under him at one point. KK's excellent leadership. Asks hard questions. He's a good facilitator. So the leadership is very mature. And then we have a guy named Joseph, it's not his real name, of course, and who is a local guy in country, and he heads up all of our training activities. So the passing on of the leadership has been smooth, good. They communicate really well together. I like to say that the staff and the SALT team is just a well-oiled machine. They like each other, they work well together, it's just going great. How are things in Hong Kong? If you've been listening to the news, Hong Kong is basically, real simply, Hong Kong is becoming a Chinese city, like Shanghai, or Guangzhou, or Nanjing, or one of those. It's not going to be the Hong Kong it used to be. It already is not the Hong Kong it used to be. The big advantage Hong Kong used to have was it was a financial hub, and all kinds of international business was done in Hong Kong, and China needed that financial hub. But now Shanghai pretty much handles most of that. And so Hong Kong, it doesn't have its unique status anymore, so they don't really need Hong Kong to be working like it used to be. It is considered a rebel city. There are too many people that have too many opinions that might be critical of the government, and that's just not good for the mainland government, and they don't need that kind of criticism. So they're looking for patriots, and the future leadership of Hong Kong will be patriots. I think you know what that would mean, right? And so they're changing all the laws of the elections, who can run for government in Hong Kong, who will be eligible. It's not the city we left 1 year ago. It's significantly different. Is that good or bad news for the church?
The grapes are getting squeezed.
The grapes getting squeezed, yeah. So in some ways, that's good news for the church. I like to remind people that I've never heard a pastor in China ever pray for a change in government. I've never heard that. and I read newsletters about ministries that do ministry in China, newsletters from this country, and I always see that. Pray against the Chinese government or pray for a change in the government. Don't do that. It's not a good idea. And that's an American idea. It is not a Chinese idea. And why is that? And why wouldn't the pastors in China pray for a change in government? It's because it has been this government that God has used to cause the church to explode. And it is just growing in wild, dramatic numbers, so why change it? That's a good thing. So the Chinese have a very different perspective on hardship, difficulty, suffering. It's okay. Didn't Jesus say that's kind of what was supposed to happen with the church? And that's the context the church was born in, and that's the context the church grew. So hardship, difficulty, opposition, belittling, misrepresentation, harassment, all of that is fine. Those can be useful things that an outsider uses to help the church focus on priorities. Absolutely no benefit for anybody to become a Christian in China, and yet they are becoming more and more Christ followers all the time. So it's just a real different way of looking at things. So are things better in Hong Kong? No. From a liberated, liberal, pro-democracy perspective, it looks terrible. From a godly Christian biblical perspective, we don't know yet. Might be okay, but it'll sure be different. So people will be watched. Church information, there'll be cameras all over the place. Pastors will be watched. That's coming. It's already in existence in China. And so, there's self-censorship, but that doesn't mean you still cannot evangelize, preach the gospel, and be prepared to be hit hard.
Yeah. Because Pastor Dan is here and he's a church planner, just one more story before we close up. But we got a young converted Muslim working for us. His name is Aman. He's Ugandan and moved up to northern Uganda to the elephant grass area where Idi Amin came from, where General Coney came from, and it's a hard area. The Acholi tribe is up there. It's feared all around for their industriousness and their physical strength. It's quite an area. And it's also where all the refugees are from South Sudan. And about 1 million refugees fled into Uganda in the last 10 years from the war there. And Uganda needed men, especially. 70,000 men were killed up in that area by one side or the other. And so they just need men. So these people come from South Sudan and they basically give them a tract of land and a passport and say welcome. But with them came about 25,000 kids that got swept in without their parents, either got separated from their parents or got killed. Parents got killed. And so they're kind of used as slaves in the refugee settlements and stuff, and taken care of, but beaten more, don't get quite the food allotment of kids with parents because there's no covering over them. So one of our Ugandan guys who lived in the bush when he was a little boy during the war, the Coney War, he lived in the bush with his mom for 9 years, trying to stay away from getting his hands cut off or becoming a child soldier. He's just got a real heart for these kids. So he'd asked us about starting a village up in northern Uganda. So we said, sure, up in the elephant grass, just out away from everything. Little village there named Powell, maybe 25 homes in it, little homes, and it's 30 miles from anything, out in the elephant grass. And so the chief of that village gave us some land and said, here, want to build a village for kids here. So Sukup Grain Manufacturing, any of you guys farmers, Sukup Grain bin manufacturers developed a grain bin, an 18-foot grain bin that can be used for a home. and it's got a double roof, so the temp is 10 degrees lower. It'll stand 137 mile-an-hour winds. We know that because it was the only thing left standing when that big hurricane came over Haiti. Those little grain bins were the only thing that didn't get swept into the sea. And so they started shipping them over there, and we put up a bunch of them and started bringing in kids. And 5 dialects of Arabic, and so lots of confusion. None of them spoke Acholi, none of them spoke English, and they're all figuring out if we're going to eat them or if what we're going to do with them. But 3 meals a day, and a lot of people smiling at them and hugging on them, and it started to go really, really good. And so we got maybe 70 of them now. Every time the director of that gets an extra $500 a month in his account, he brings another 5 kids, and so he hopes to have 200 there eventually and raise them as a herd. And put them through school together, give them just the best education possible. But Aman moved up there to work with youth, had to learn Acholi, moved up there. He got a grain bin to live in, right in amongst the boys of this little village place out in the elephant grass. One day he comes home from playing soccer with the boys, and there's a woman in his doorwell of his grain bin screaming. And screaming unconsolably, just screaming and crying and screaming, actually frothing at the mouth a little bit, out of her mind. And what do you do? Tried to talk to her. She couldn't be consoled. Just screaming and crying and screaming and sitting on the ground in his doorway. So Aman thinks, gee, this is a mess. So he calls the local constable policeman from Powell, who's a farmer, and says, I got a problem here. You want to come? And so this guy says, yeah, I'll be there in 45 minutes or so. So this woman's screaming outside of his house. And so Aman goes out and, like all of us, thinks, wonder if I should pray for her. We always think of that about a day late. And so gets down beside her and prays the name of Jesus over her. And she just stopped. Came into her right mind and said, I walked here 6 miles today from my village of Pabo. I'm just desperate. Spiritually, I'm just desperate. I need to learn who this Jesus is. And so Aman shared the gospel with her, and she came to know Christ that day, and then took him home to her family in Pabo, and he shared the gospel with her family, and her family put their faith in Christ. A couple of her uncles, a couple of her brothers came to Christ, and a church was planted there right that night in Pabo. And so today there's a little church building organization out of Ames, Iowa, that's over there building a brick little church building in Pabo, because about 70 people have been meeting under this tree for the last 8 months. And the church is growing as the gospel goes out in the region. And pretty soon they'll have a little church building from the screaming lady. Yeah, so, yeah.
Maybe I can add another little church plant story for you. This is fun. 2 minutes? Okay. All right. We were at a training site. There was a young guy there. Could barely read. I think he had a 3rd grade education. Memorized all kinds of things. I was talking to him about church planting and said, so how do you go about doing church planting? He says, well, we go into a village and we ask around, who is the most sick, hopeless person in your village? Everybody knows who that is. We go over there to that person and we start fasting and praying for them. God will heal them. So, do you have the gift of healing? He looked at me like I was an idiot and said, of course not. Does God answer all the time? And again, he thought, how stupid are you? Of course not. And so what happens? He says, well, we just pray, and sometimes nothing happens. And we get the message. God says, I've not prepared this village. This is the wrong time, wrong place. You need to leave. And so then we leave. Sometimes we get arrested. And so we get arrested because we're arrested for being fake medical people. We're supposed to be healing this people, and we have nothing for them, and so they throw us in jail as imposters. He said, but then sometimes that's what God uses, is because then the village people know, what are you doing? What do you believe? You're thrown in jail, you're willing to suffer for, what is this? And then sometimes they're ready to hear the gospel because we suffer. And he says, and then sometimes God miraculously heals the person, and everybody knows this person, and there's a dramatic healing, and this power of God is demonstrated, and we know God has been there before. He's prepared the way, and there's always a massive harvesting of souls. Church planting. I studied church planting at Trinity. That was not one of the classes or methods. So let's pray. Now, Father, as we share these stories, we want to give honor to you. It's all about you. How wonderful you are. And we live this very comfortable, safe, secure life here. And we thank you for it. It's not something to be guilty of. We're just amazed at your abundance and the privileges we have. And we lift up those who suffer and those whose life is hard, but they walk with you. And there is this refreshing, deep, abiding sense of the presence of God, and it's all worth it. Thank you for the privilege of calling them our brothers and sisters. And may we sit at their feet, learn from them more of the wonder and grace and mercy and presence and loving kindness and tenderness of who you are. And so we come to you very unworthy of you calling us your children as we stand with them in prayer today, thanking you for the beauty of your church all across this little planet. We give thanks and we pray these things this morning in the powerful name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. Amen. Should we keep these?